second. Sorry about that, guys. Hey, welcome to A Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall. What do we do here?
Well, a pastor and an atheist talk about all kinds of different subjects, not just religion, but also philosophy,
and which one
politics. Right? You know, sometimes I think I'm the pastor here.
Sometimes it's hard to tell. Sorry about that, everyone.
Well, I'm very liberal, relatively speaking. Scott is actually quite conservative, but we're also very good friends. We're high school classmates, and we've remained friends for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. And now here we are doing a show where our opposing viewpoints clash routinely.
Yep.
Yet the friendship endures.
That's right. And we just have to watch out. You know, all those things from our high school past could come back and bite us.
They could, and if you got it coming, you got it coming.
You know, like counterfeiting and forgery, who knows what could happen.
Oh, now, Scott, let's not talk about that because we did do that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
wait,
right.
Yeah, wait.
That is another story for another show.
That's another story for another show, as long as our high school economics teacher is not watching.
We're good to go.
Yeah, so we'll share that story at another time because it is a pretty riveting story. Maybe we'll talk about it when we discuss the whole Kavanaugh thing and high school antics coming back to bite you.
Right. Hey, maybe next Sunday, or we might have to make up economics because they'll just go back and retroactively fail us and make us repeat the class.
Yeah, right. Shenanigans, but not trying to make light of other shenanigans, but we grew up in the age where all of our stupid stuff that we did wasn't recorded on social media. So
right. So we're good.
we're good to go. We're glad to have grown up in the age when there's no social media. Back when we were making dumb decisions and doing stupid things, as most young people. Sorry, Josh. No offense.
Right.
But I think your daughter was probably the same way. Like my boys. They're just like, oh man, these people make such dumb decisions.
It's a different world today for sure.
Yeah. So, hey, what are we talking about? We have something that we were talking about a little bit on Facebook. What were we doing?
Well, we're talking about government this time, and is government really a valid solution to problems? And the real question is, how much overlap do Scott and I have? Because I think you agree that government is necessary for some things.
Yes.
But I tend to prefer government as an answer to a wider range of problems than what Scott does, who wants to keep government as absolutely limited as possible.
I believe that for the most part, people should be allowed, at least in this government that was established 242 years ago. 242 years ago.
You're gonna make me do math, right?
Yeah. Sorry. Well, actually, I will not say that because I was about to give away the age of my wife, but. Anyway, but yes, I kind of more see that an individual should have much more authority over their own destiny than a government allows to have. That government overreach has a tendency to start reaching into our personal lives and our private lives and saying, you can't do that. The idea that the government's going to say, I'm going to protect you from yourself.
Mm-hmm. Like with warning labels?
Yeah, well, no, yeah. I mean, with warning labels, I'm sorry. I'm not stupid and I don't need a warning label to tell me that coffee's hot.
But I appreciate warning labels.
I don't.
I do.
I don't. Them. I mean, quite honestly, again, this is where, okay, am I about to espouse social Darwinism? Yeah. I think some of those people who don't understand, they kind of need to be weeded out by the accidents. I mean, come on, if you're do not plug in this extension cord underwater. Do you really need a sign that says that? Because that was a lawsuit somewhere because some part of the government said, you know what, you're right. People, they don't know that you can't plug in electricity in underwater. We should tell them, and this person should be awarded money because that person was stupid. I mean...
Well, is that actually mandated by law, or is it a private corporation covering its behind?
Oh, no, it's most likely it's a resolution from a lawsuit.
Maybe so.
It's a resolution
from a lawsuit. It could also be a common sense thing to print on a warning label just to kind of cover all the bases, right? Because if I'm a lawyer and I'm working for a corporation and I want that corporation to be as insulated as possible.
But that whole line of thinking of saying I have to,
Yeah, my gosh, people have a right to ask for a corporation who causes them harm from neglect or negligence or what have you they have a right to sue. My goodness, you know.
But frivolous lawsuits, most of them are frivolous. It's just it's the new lottery. It's the new lottery.
Yeah, I don't know.
No. Again, we're going to be talking a little bit about this, but those people who go and measure your ADA compliance, who literally come in and say, "Oh, you're a quarter inch off. I'm going to sue you now." I mean, is that the purpose of it? Was that quarter inch the purpose of it? If you're going through all this, but no, this is simply litigation lottery. And
that quarter inch is there for a reason,
right? But within margin. But I'm just saying it's the idea that you can then take this and use it for litigation lottery. The more rules you can create, the more things you go, the more you can catch people and make money out of it.
You're entitled to be made whole again following some kind of harm. If you suffer harm, then
where's the harm?
Well, you have to prove that in order to sue for damages. That's part of any civil lawsuit. You don't just get damages because I went to the local restaurant and I measured the walkway and found the walkway was a quarter inch too short.
But
they
are
damages. Winning. Well, they might win. They're not necessarily going to make a lot of money. The worst thing that would happen in that case, unless you can demonstrate some kind of harm, is they're going to be told to redo the job. But usually there's inspectors and people who are responsible for handling all of that and certifying that, yes, this walkway is ADA compliant.
Yeah, and those people signed off on it.
Okay, and then those people
but it means nothing. Have you ever been through have you been through construction?
No.
We've been through construction here at the church, and it is absolutely ridiculous. It is, here's the rule, here's this, we build it to the rule, we do all this, and then somebody just comes in like, well, no, that's not quite right. Well, it doesn't matter what that says. I'm saying that's not right.
Yeah,
and now you got to redo it.
You need that signature.
Yeah. So that's a complete overreach. That's how do you even? It was a big old thing of. There were so many things that were done that was like, this is what we were told to do, but now it's a different inspector. And now this inspector saying, nope, no, it's this. It's like, what the heck?
Do you know how long
it's the power of them? It's the power that they have to wield over others that I have a big problem with. To just nonchalantly wield the power because, well, we have this law, we have this thing, so now I can wield this power over you to make you do what I want. And I want that as limited as possible, especially in the areas where, it's the idea that government is trying to keep you safe from yourself.
Do you know how long it's been since we've had a major air disaster here in the United States? As far as I know,
2001?
Yeah. But in October of 2001, there's a plane crash in New York, actually. And it was a large airliner that crashed from mechanical reasons. It wasn't terrorism. It was a month after 9/11. And it scared the heck out of a lot of people because people were like, "Oh my gosh, 9/11 again!" But no, it was.
Was it after or before 9/11 that we did actually?
A month after.
No. So was it after or before 9/11 where a small commuter plane hit another building somewhere?
Probably.
And it was like in Texas or something like that, and it was like an accident or something like that. Yeah.
But the government is the reason why our air travel is so safe today. We have the Federal Aviation Administration, and every time there's an accident, even an accident overseas around the world, they will go out and they will conduct the most thorough investigation known to humanity. And they will come up with a cause or a reason, and then they will issue new guidelines and regulations that have to be immediately implemented by the different firms to protect people from air disasters. And as a consequence, we've kind of got to this point where disasters that used to happen every so many months or years when we were young have not happened now for the better part of 18 years, 17 years.
Speaking of the FAA, have you tried licensing a drone?
Yes, I've heard of that because I flew a drone recently for work stuff. It was a work thing. And there's all these little, all this red tape and all that, right? But again, that exists for a reason.
Right, but it's not. They didn't know how to switch it over. Literally, there was like, well, you just have to be a pilot, but not do this. And there was a whole thing of red tape to fly a drone. There was a whole thing of red tape to fly a drone to where you had to basically learn all the rules of a real pilot, and then send them a letter explaining what rules should not apply to you to get an exemption, so that you could fly a 5-pound drone.
Yeah, it's a case of the government trying to catch up to what's happening out there in technology in the wild, if you will.
And the government's really good at that.
Well, it works. It may be slow, but it works. You know, I haven't heard of any accidents between an aircraft and a drone that I know of. And if it takes that level of bureaucracy to keep us safe from an air disaster, I'm all for it.
So as long as you stay safe, you're good at sacrificing your freedom.
Well, that's a big part. Well, if freedom means endangering other people wantonly, yes, absolutely. That I should not have the freedom to endanger others.
No, that's not what's going on. I'm saying the freedom to not wantonly endanger someone, just freedom. Freedom. You're willing to sacrifice freedom for safety. For a good portion of it, you're a lot more willing to sacrifice freedom for safety than I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I like clean air, clean drinking water. I like road standards for my car.
But even a lot of that is all political. It's political power.
Well,
it is power. It's control.
It is power.
It's political power and control to keep you from doing what you want.
And if what I want to do is going to endanger other people, then yes, I think I should.
And as long as any government agency gets to say, well, now we determine that this endangers people, now we control it. Mm-hmm. I don't agree with that. I don't like that. I don't like the idea of like, well, now we're going to say that this will cause this, so now that gives us the power to control this little thing here. And now here's all these companies. I go back to ADA again. You know, the Obamacare. You go to a pool. Any pool in the United States, any hotel,
I've been
any pool.
Sure.
What does it have?
Well, it has signs.
No. What does
no lifeguard on duty?
What does every pool and every spa in the United States now have?
They have the life preserver. They have all the little.
They have an electronic lift and chair that was required.
Yes, I've seen that.
That was required by. What company lobbied Obamacare? What company lobbied to say, "Hey, we want to make billions of dollars in making these chairs. We're going to convince the government to say every pool and spa in the United States has to have this. So there's rails, there's all this, but no, it has to have this electronic chair." And how much billions of dollars did those companies make, or that one company, whatever company did it, that lobbied to say the power to be able to say if we can say this is a public safety issue, all of the companies that can then come in and make money off of that and lobby that for what? Have they ever been used?
Oh, I'm sure they have.
Have you ever seen one used?
I don't recall, but that doesn't mean they've never been used.
Well, if they let people in water and they're covered with dust, I would say that they're not been used.
Well, I don't know. Things can accumulate dust depending on where you're at. Certainly living here where we do, we get a lot of dust on things. Mm-hmm. So I would rather have those things in place so that people who are handicapped have access.
My sister's handicapped. She doesn't need that.
Well, everybody's different. Handicapped people are different. You could, God forbid, lose the use of your legs in an accident, and I want you to still be able to swim, Scott.
Yes,
if you want to take a dip in the pool, I want you to have that level of access.
At what cost? Honestly,
I don't think the cost is unreasonable. Our economy certainly didn't collapse. No hotels went out of business. Mm-hmm. And those facilities, that access is now there for you. And it's there for me if I should ever need it. I'm glad it's there.
Just can't stand waste.
Okay,
Government is the best at waste.
But
for what?
Well, waste
I wouldn't
is a
expect
pretty broad
that,
term, right?
I wouldn't expect that treatment for me.
Okay, but here's the thing is I don't know that you can label having access for handicapped people as some form of waste.
When it's not being used, yeah.
There's a lot of things that are not being used.
And it's waste.
There's things in our garage, and there's things in your desk drawer that's not being used.
And it's waste.
Okay, so you have the option to dispose of it, I suppose. But
and no, we don't. That's my point. The law is saying, no, you don't have that option. You have to waste.
I don't know. I don't want to call access waste. Providing access to people, even if it's just 1% of our population, to me, that is not waste. Something that serves 1% of America's population, to me, is not necessarily waste. So there might be a different example out there of government waste. Certainly government pork is a thing. Government does waste resources.
Yeah.
In fact, that's one of my biggest complaints about taxation is that we pay a lot of money in taxes and we don't get the corresponding value for that money. That value isn't given to us. It's
Sorry, I just realized
shoveled off overseas.
I didn't have
or
comments.
somewhere
There was a
else.
bunch of comments. Sorry about that.
So
Hey, Steve's live. Yeah, he's watching us live today. That's good.
good. But I wouldn't call access waste. So having, railings in a room, having a wheelchair lift, having a ramp in your walkway or something, I would not refer to any of those things as waste, even if they are only used like 1% of the time or less. At what point they will be used at some point, it's definitely not waste.
So it's
to
a
me.
good idea that everybody should own a gun because you might need it that one time, right?
Well, maybe so, Scott. Maybe so.
Because
but
that argument has to be able to go both ways.
okay. I'm not going to say people can't have guns.
But you're going to say which ones we can.
Well, I'm going to draw some reasonable limits. I'm probably not going to let you have a nuclear bomb or a rocket launcher.
But you're not going to make
or
reasonable limits
a mortar or a fully automatic MG42 necessarily.
Come on, why not? I really, really want one.
Right?
No, I'd never be able to afford one.
Just the ammo cost alone, right?
Yeah, thanks to government.
But anyway, so I think government serves a valuable role in the world, but anything like any tool, like a firearm is also a tool, government is also a tool, and it can be used for destructive means. Certainly, most people who fear the big government like to point at examples such as Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany. Of course, you can also look to
Wow, he
smaller
doesn't even
government.
mention China.
Well, China's certainly one of them, right? Communist China under Mao. But you could also look at the United States, and you look at things like, the eradication of Native Americans. Our government was certainly smaller back then, but it didn't prevent our government from sanctioning mass genocide.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have mass genocide and you can have mass murder, whether you have a large government or a small government. So I'm trying to figure here, government, like any tool, can be used for good or for bad. But generally speaking, if government were used always for bad, if I should reset this argument, I think government is generally good. Otherwise, we wouldn't have kept it around for so long. I think it serves a utilitarian purpose in everyone's lives, where the benefit outweighs the harm, so much so that we have continued to use this institution instead of abandoning it and
I think you're
not
confusing
using it at all.
I think you're confusing generally good with I just had the phrase in there and I should have just interrupted you when I had the phrase because now I can't remember what.
Well, thank you for letting me finish my thought.
Necessary evil. And there's a difference between a general good and a necessary evil. I think government is a necessary evil. I do not believe that it is generally good. I
so
believe
in
it's
order
a
to say
necessary
it's
evil.
a necessary evil, then you have to say that it's inherently evil.
I do.
Okay, and then of course I'm gonna let you get away with the whole evil distinction. I don't want to get into whether or not evil actually exists.
Well, why not? You said good. What's the difference?
Right. So I don't want to get to that debate. Why do you feel government is evil?
Because the power that it wields over people, it is the power to wield over another person is an evil. There is a necessary level of that has to happen. And the less of it that we can have, the better it's going to be.
So it's necessary to have power over people, coercive power.
Yes.
Because power is
evil exists
generally coercive.
Evil exists among people. So you need some sort of coercive power to keep them in check.
Suppress the evil.
To suppress the evil. But when you give evil people with evil, because we all have evil tendencies.
Sure.
As soon as you give evil people power, that power is necessarily evil. So because there's evil in us, we need to have a power to keep that evil in check. But that doesn't mean that power is good. It's a necessary evil. That if we didn't have evil in our lives, now this is somebody might come on to me, well, Scott, you said authority is all this is established by God, and yes, all of that is after the fact that men are evil, that people are evil. Without evil in us, there would be no necessity for government.
So, what happens in the
there was no
government?
mayor in Eden. There was no government in Eden. There was God.
God.
There was
right,
God,
which is 100% big government. I mean, it doesn't
No.
get any bigger than God,
No,
does it?
because government is by man.
Mhm. So what would you call the dominion or kingdom of God? I mean, the kingdom of God is literally expressed in terms
We
of
understand
government.
that we understand as humans. It's expressed to us in terms that we understand.
Okay, so why can't I call God government, the first and original government?
Because again, government is humans over humans.
So what do you call it? What do you call God's dominion over the universe?
Sovereign.
Well, sovereign means that you are free and independent, that you are sort of self-justifying in terms of power,
Which
and
is what
authority.
God is.
Mm-hmm.
But God's not a government. It's not a governing body. Not a governing.
But he gave commandments and everything. He's got this whole list of things you must never do.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 10 things.
But it's not, again, it's not human over human.
Mm-hmm.
That's the.
But yet it turned into that as
It
soon
had
as Moses
it
showed
had
up
to,
on the
yeah.
scene.
It had to be with humans over humans. Again, it came from the initial choice of evil.
Mm-hmm.
Now that once evil is there,
Right.
because here's the thing: God didn't have the 10 Commandments in the Garden of Eden.
Okay, you're right. Yeah.
He didn't establish it with the 10 Commandments and all this stuff. He said, all of this is here.
Well,
There's
he had
one
a
choice.
covenant with Adam and Eve nonetheless. Did he not have some kind of a covenant, a sacred agreement?
Not with them. No, the first covenant is with Abraham.
Didn't he tell? Okay.
The
then
first
I
covenant
don't
was with
know
Abraham.
what. Okay.
That's
okay.
the Old Testament. It's the first covenant was that he made with Abraham.
But he still had a deal with Adam and Eve. Like, all of these things are yours. You shall have dominion over all of these things. You name the animals and so on. Just don't eat that fruit, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Don't eat that fruit. As long as you don't eat that fruit. Now, to me, that sounds like the first law.
It's the one law that says if you eat that, you will now be responsible for your own self. You'll now be responsible for your own sin.
Well, gosh, I mean, to me, that sounds like Eve is the first rebel, the first freedom fighter.
Yeah, that worked out great, didn't it?
Well, better to die on your feet than live on your knees, I guess. I don't know. I guess that's the beginning of a theological debate between us.
Yeah, Josh Gunderson, government is as good as we're willing to make it, though it's an interesting point that I make. The idea that I'm trying to get across is government has to be inherently evil because it is by evil men. It's a necessary evil. We are evil in our nature. Mankind is evil in its nature. So any government that's established by and through mankind is going to be evil.
So
and the more limits you put on it, the better, because it will eventually expand into a great evil.
What about those first Christian communities where they essentially governed themselves, but they had leadership?
Right. Some of those have become corrupt and can become corrupt. Any leadership by and under man will eventually have the potential to be corrupt. So the less power you give it, the longer it will take to become corrupt. It'll always fail.
Mm-hmm.
It'll always fail. Any government, any governing thing under man will always fail because men are inherently, and I say mankind, they're inherently
be right
evil.
in terms of it's always going to fail.
Yeah.
Because every government ever devised on earth
Yeah.
is always collapsed. You know, it takes time. You can
Typically
look at the
under
Roman
it,
Empire and it
typically
could take
under
400 years.
its own power
weight.
and under its own weight because it got so big.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can just keep it small longer, it could last longer, better for everyone.
Maybe so. However, how else do you get things like the interstate highway system, a transcontinental railroad, our electric grid?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get all of these things, the clean water and air and clean food standards and so on, safety standards for the workplace? How do you get all of these things without a government to say, look, we're going to impose from on high that this is now the rule?
Maybe all of those things aren't as great as we think. Maybe they're not worth the trade-off.
Okay, so the trade-off for, clean drinking water, what's the trade-off there?
You find your clean drinking water and you pump it yourself.
Oh, okay, that's practical.
That's what people did for millennia.
And that's during those same millennia, people also died by the thousands from outbreaks of things like cholera.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the developing world where people are still getting their water from a single source, and guess what? Diseases, cholera being one of them. I prefer to live in a cholera-free society, and if that means I have to put up with a little more evil government, you know what? Bring it on.
That's where we differ. That's where we differ, because I want to keep it as small as possible because of its evil power.
Well, how about the net effect of government over time? Because even if I agree with you that in time governments are going to become corrupt, they are going to collapse under the weight of their own bureaucracy and so on, our own government included. Nonetheless, don't the benefits of government generally outweigh the harms, which generally tend to come towards the end when they're old and decrepit and
So
corrupt?
that's fine. Let's just pass on the harm to our other generations. Let's
the
enjoy.
harm
Let's
happens
enjoy.
when it happens.
Let's
It happens
enjoy.
when it happens.
Right, but the idea. But you're saying I would rather have my comfort now and let somebody else later on down
I'm
the
not
road.
necessarily saying
That's
that.
literally
I don't
what you
get to
said.
pick
That's
which
literally what you said.
Part of the dynastic cycle of a government I am born into. I am born into this age, and I strongly suspect within my lifetime I will see the collapse of our own government, or at least a descent of our own government into some kind of darkness that I would rather not.
I feel it already has.
Well, I think it's on the way. So we agree, right? So
Yeah.
I
have
no intention here of passing on because I'm living through it right
I'm
now.
on the side that said let's slow it down, and you're on the side that says let's speed it up.
Right, because after you speed it up, remember it's a cycle, it comes out the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when it comes out the other side, it might be more to your liking.
And it may not. Worked out
It
great
may
in
not.
Cuba.
It may not. We are rolling dice. At least Cuba has good health care, yeah? Better health care than the United States. But anyway.
Yeah. Let's cheer on Cuba because they got great health care.
Well, you know,
Come
let's
on.
give credit where credit's due. If they do
Oh, you
one
are?
thing
So
better
you
than
do
us.
want to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, I do.
Wow. And all the credit for Trump? You got credit for him?
I don't know that he's done much to improve this nation. He's done a lot of tax cuts for the wealthy, but the ordinary, everyday Joe doesn't seem to be
So
better
he
off.
doesn't really believe in giving credit where credit's due.
Well, I don't want to devolve into that, but I'm real curious what you think he's done that he deserves all kinds of praise.
I'm
and
fascinated
accolades.
that you're not curious.
I am curious. I want to know.
You-
I just don't want to spin off on a tangent.
No, I'm saying you haven't been curious enough to look it up. You haven't been curious enough to see what's happened. You haven't been curious enough. You have your opinion already. You have your bias already, and you haven't been curious enough to take a look at that. That's what going off the idea that what you're saying of. Anyway,
I don't want to go on a penny trail right now.
No.
But you hold that because we may talk about that after the show and see if that's a good topic for next week.
Sure.
All right. So I would argue that the net effect of government outweighs the harm. That if the harm outweighed the net effect of government, even if government were evil, we would abandon government for
Another government.
For
another government.
Okay, so what do you think these alternatives are? Is there an option? Is there an alternative to government?
No, there isn't.
Okay, so if you
It's a
shrink
necessary
government
evil.
down, what do you think happens?
If you shrink government down, there's less power to be corrupted for a longer time.
In the hands of a central government. But what people, I think, don't understand is that power is always going to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the government doesn't have power, then that power will simply devolve to a private corporation or to some other unit, whether it's a warlord or a church or religious organization or a small community or a clan or anything. But you are never going to be out from under the thumb of power. You are never going to escape that. It's always going to exist in some fashion. So your options are you can have government power, you can have corporate power, you can have a warlord or a church or a clan. But there's always going to be power over you. And that's fine. That's a fair choice. That's totally a legit choice. It's a valid answer. But for me, because I'm not a believer, I would prefer a secular government that is based largely on the values that I hold, just as your government would be, your theocracy would be based on the values that you hold.
Mexico, basically.
Okay, well, those are warlords, right?
That's what I'm saying. Cartels. Yes. Josh said cartels. That's what's happening in places like Mexico.
So what I want to emphasize for people is that you're never going to escape power. If you are trying to escape the power that kind of controls you and influences you and limits your choices, or at times opens up choices to you that can be used for good as well, it's not going to happen. one power will simply be exchanged for another. You could totally wave a magic wand and do away with our federal government, and something else would
not be
immediately
smart.
replace the vacuum.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe it's the least of the evils. I certainly wouldn't want corporate power to determine my fate. There is a great...
What I would like is more local power, because local power is more controlled than central power.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's how the United States was originally envisioned.
Yes.
Was that we
That's
were actually,
why I
it's
keep
called
wanting
the
to go
United
back.
States.
That's why I want to. That's why, as a conservative, I want to go back to as close as possible to what it was originally founded.
Mm-hmm. But there are some problems, of course, with.
But wouldn't
the
that be a
federal
lesser?
system
Isn't that a lesser evil than the
with
larger
the
federal?
states.
That the states and the local being more in control, isn't that a lesser evil than a larger?
It depends on the question. First of all, there's a thing in the Constitution called the Interstate Commerce Clause. Okay, and the Interstate Commerce Clause,
Which has
in
been
the
abused
Constitution-
significantly.
Yeah, I think you have some ground to argue that. The Interstate Commerce Clause basically is used to regulate anything that goes from one state to another state. And originally, that had to do with literal commerce, trade.
Yep.
But today, it applies to everything from water to electricity to internet to television to radio waves to people themselves. Anything that moves across, a state boundary.
Because at
immediately
one
falls
point,
subject to the
because
Interstate
at
Commerce
one
Clause.
point, a government said, "This is something we should have authority over," and now, decades and almost centuries later, when was the Commerce Clause?
Well, I think the Commerce Clause was probably part of the original Constitution.
Right. So you have this here that says we need to regulate this, and now that amount of power has been so abused because, well, hey, this falls under that, this falls under that, this falls under that. As soon as you establish that a governing power has authority in this subject, now allows abuses in that subject. Whatever it says, oh, well, we have authority to now regulate this, that opens the door to so much abuse of that, because it can just be like, well, hey, this falls under that. Hey, as long as we convince somebody this falls under that, now we can control this as well. And if we convince somebody this falls under that, now we control this as well.
Do you have an example?
Well, I mean, the Commerce Clause.
Do you have an example of an abuse taking place under the Commerce Clause?
It's that the government can now say, well, this now comes under our control, even though it's not commerce and it's not this.
There's a good reason for that. For example, think about human trafficking and civil rights, things like that. These are very important. It's important for the government to come in and say this is outlawed across all 50 states. Things like internet neutrality, right? This is why the government can come in and say the internet will be regulated at this level or at this level or at this level. So that you have a uniform experience wherever you go. You don't have one state has internet and the other state has no internet. Things like that. You don't get these wild and crazy differences. You have consistency, which does facilitate things like commerce. It also protects individual rights and things like that. So you look at education, right? You don't want students from, California to be dumb compared to students from New York. So you might set some kind of federal standards for education. Well, but the fact is, you get some kind of uniformity.
Unless they go to a private school, which is not part of the government, then they're usually pretty much smarter.
Well, private schools tend to be kind of roped into also federal standards because there's curriculum standards, and a lot of those curriculum standards.
But isn't it amazing that private schools can hit those standards for less money?
Well, they can, but there are reasons for why that's done. And you
because
have to
of
also
government
understand
bureaucracy.
That private schools make up a lot of their funding from things like individual donations and fundraising and things like that.
But they do it.
So private schools also have substantial incomes to offset the money that's provided in the federal system.
Right, but they can still do it for less than the government can.
Yeah, I don't have any books in front of me for any private schools, so I'm not sure if part of this is creative accounting or marketing on their part. I would imagine that the price paid to educate a student in a public school and a private school is probably closer than most people think. Certainly, public schools are bound by many laws and regulations that probably do cause public education to cost a
Which
little
you
more
said
money.
also apply to private schools.
What?
You just said they fall under the same regulations and stuff. So it's the same thing. It's the bureaucracy of large government that causes the inefficiency and waste.
It can.
It does. It
Mhm.
will, by necessity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The larger the government entity, the more
But that
waste,
doesn't
the
mean
more.
that private is always better.
It almost always is.
I mean, have you ever tried to mail a letter with FedEx? Or would you rather put, a 50-cent stamp on it and mail it through the Postal Service?
You don't mail it at all. Yeah, FedEx is much better than the Postal Service.
Okay, and so you want to pay $5 to send a first-class envelope?
We don't send that anymore.
Well, yeah, we do. People sometimes use mail still. Mail is still a thing, right?
Mhm.
You do get letters in your box, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Junk
And
mail, most
do
of
you,
it.
Do you ever write a letter and send something off, or a Christmas card, or a greeting card, or have to mail in a bill or with a check or anything?
Most of those, no.
Okay. Well, the bottom line is, regardless of whether or not you do that,
Yeah.
many Americans still have a reason to use the Postal Service. And they use the Postal Service. They put a 50-cent stamp on. They put their letter out there, and it gets delivered within 2 to 3 days across most of the country.
Well,
And they prefer that to Federal Express.
Well,
or
the
UPS.
reason they do that is because Federal Express cannot afford
Mhm.
the losses that the government can. The
Oh, I
government,
don't-
the government can afford to lose money to keep that process. You compare apples to apples. Again, you're comparing apples to oranges. You compare apples to apples and what it takes to ship packages. Yes, FedEx is going to win every time over UPS. Oh, sorry, over USPS.
Well, the bottom line is the USPS does a very good job of delivering mail, just like our public school system does a pretty good job of educating millions of people.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. You and I are the product of public education systems, and we are pretty darn well educated. I would think we're a success story
Compared to,
compared to.
aren't you
people
always the
who
one?
don't
Aren't you the one who's always posting stuff about how terrible the public education system is compared to other countries?
Well, it needs reform. It definitely needs reform. But if the alternative is no public education system, I'm going to vote with public education every
Well, the
single time.
alternative is private, and for less money.
Private if it's available. And the problem is most people cannot afford private education.
So how about we do vouchers then? Since private does it much better, let's just get the government money to help pay for private schools.
I'm not necessarily opposed to that idea.
Okay.
But the bottom line is I think we need to do a better job of funding our schools. I don't
Of course,
think
if federal vouchers are now paying for for private education, would that now just make it public education?
No, it would probably still be private. It depends on who's controlling the curriculum and so on.
Yeah.
So I have no problem with people wanting to send their kids to private school because guess what? My daughter graduated from private school. She went to private school all her life.
Mm-hmm.
My son went to private kindergarten. He is actually now private preschool right here where you work.
Yep.
I sent my son here to your private school. Now he's doing his first year in kindergarten in public school. But nonetheless, I have no problem with people choosing private education. And I do understand that the data tends to be better. The outcomes based on the data suggest that private education is better. What I would like to see is public education elevated to that same standard. Regardless of, it costs a few dollars more here or there, I really would like to see it elevated to that standard. And I think there are several things you could do. You have smaller school sizes. You need to have, I think the smaller school is a big deal. It really is.
More schools, less prisons?
Exactly. A lot of that, But I think there are a lot of things that we can do, and I think we need to pay teachers a lot more so that we attract best talent, to become educators. We need to have our best people. I understand the creme de la creme should be out there on the cutting edge, building bigger, better, faster things.
And yet most private schools don't pay their teachers as much as public schools.
No, they pay them much less, which
Right.
is also
and they still get better
unfortunate.
results.
Well, I think that has more to do with the environment, the school environment itself. Again, the small school size is a big deal, So anyway, I think there are reforms that we need to make. We need to update our educational system for the 21st century. We are using a 19th century model of education that we are only slowly reforming and updating, and we're reforming it and updating it within a 19th century framework. So the whole model itself, I frankly think needs to be revamped. And for the first time ever,
And why do you think we're stuck in this model?
Well, I think it's conservatism. So it's conservatism across the board. The whole idea that we don't want to spend money on updating the model
why do you think
to
private
follow
schools
progressive models of education.
Why do you
like they
think
do
private
overseas.
schools? Why do you think private schools haven't advanced?
I haven't said private schools haven't advanced.
No, why do you think private schools haven't left this model?
Well, private schools being smaller are a little more flexible.
But why haven't they left this model?
I think a lot of them have. They have more technology, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
They have
Then what model are you talking
involvement
about?
from the parents and the
That has
parents
nothing to do with
of
technology.
Parent involvement in a private school tends to be much higher than parent involvement in a public school.
But what's the that you're talking about the model? What exactly is the model? Is it the
well the 19th century was really designed to crank people out to work in factories back when the factory was just as good as it was going to get. And the idea is you put people in columns and rows and you teach them all the same, and 80% are going to make it and 20% are not, and that's your breakage and your waste.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like the same way you run a factory. It's literally a mill for producing, people who can read, write, and do arithmetic, because their entire purpose is going to be to do some basic math and reading and writing and pull a lever all day.
What is preventing innovative schools from getting out of that model? Come on, say it. What's preventing innovative schools from getting out of that model?
Conservative government bureaucracy.
So government bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
Government bureaucracy is keeping it down. The very government bureaucracy that you're espousing for.
But the
reason they can't leave this is because of the very standards you uphold. The very standards government makes these standards. When government makes these standards, that's what the standards are.
Mm-hmm.
Try to advance out of them.
Right. What we have, the standards and the system, as flawed as it may be, is better than the alternative of having nothing. So right there, government has done a net good for society.
You were just describing it as a mill to crank people out with 20%.
Which is better than nothing. Which is still better than nothing. Now I think we can reach a better standard where we get close to 100%. And I think the way to do that is to leverage technology, to reduce school sizes, and to have parents more involved in students' educations.
Josh Gunderson is asking, where's the proof that private does better? Typically in all ranges of evaluating students on testing and all that kind of stuff, typically standardized testing,
graduation rates,
all that kind of stuff, they're all higher at private schools.
Yeah, that's generally quite true. But that doesn't mean that public schools can't aspire to that same standard.
Right.
It's not the fact that, private schools may
It's just tough for everybody to get out of the standard when the government sets the standard and it's wrong.
Correct, because government bureaucracies tend to become inefficient. They become bloated. They become inefficient. They're not as responsive to changes in
Thank you for agreeing with me.
Okay, so I agree with you there, but that doesn't mean government can't also be the solution. I think the panacea to this would be for the government to say we're going to redirect funding from tax breaks for the 1% to actually putting money into education. We're going to break up the schools so that we have
America spends more money on education per capita than any other country, and we still can't get up there. It's not a money issue. It's not a throw more money at it issue. The bureaucracy, you throw more money at any government bureaucracy, the bureaucracy just gets bigger.
How do our school sizes compare to other schools?
We have to trim the fat. We have to cut.
And how involved are parents in their children's schooling in this country?
Not very much.
What kind of schooling do we have where we focus on the test rather than actually teaching life skills and practical knowledge?
Perfect. So instead of just throwing more money at it, let's figure out what needs to cut. Let's trim fat. Let's make government smaller, more focused, instead of just throwing more.
Anything from education per se, but
there's lots that has to be cut from education. Education is a big fat. American education public is a big fat obese person lumbering around saying, "Feed me more." It's like, no, let's trim it down and make you efficient. Let's trim you down and make you athletic. Let's trim you down and make you, healthy, instead of just throwing more money at it and making the bureaucracy bigger. That is a perfect example of government bureaucracy getting bigger and bigger and bigger and lumbering more and more and more, becoming less and less efficient while gobbling up more resources.
Okay.
Let's trim the fat.
I agree with you in theory. I certainly agree with you in theory. But I also think...
But you want to take actions that do the opposite. I agree with you, but I want to do actions that are going to do the opposite.
Because I think the best panacea for this would actually come from the government. If the government reformed the educational system, it could do so very rapidly compared to simply wiping out the public education system and telling everybody...
Is that what I'm saying? No.
Well, you want all the schools to be private.
I'm saying trim it down.
What are you saying? Privatize all the public schools?
No, I'm saying allow more privatization. If they're doing it better, Pay the private companies to do it if they're doing it better. Be efficient.
Well, there's nothing that prevents that from happening in the status quo. People like your church can go out. Your church has already established a private school.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping people from establishing private schools.
And we do that. But I'm saying if government wants to do something better, hire out private companies that have to compete for it to do it better.
Well,
if private companies are doing it better, why not hire them to do it better?
But I think you have some underlying socioeconomic issues. Like you have to get parents involved. And when most of the parents are working class and they're working 1 or 2 or 3 jobs and minimum wage and they can't take time off work, I think that's a huge problem. I think the existing public school system would actually be improved if we, for example, applied using the government a higher minimum wage across the board so that all people received a living wage, if you will, and allowed people to take time off work to participate in their children's education. All of a sudden we would see public school pop, even within the current framework. The current model that I don't care for that much. Yeah. I think we would see an immediate improvement across the board.
Again, Josh Gunderson is saying, so cuts for the sake of cuts. No, cuts for the sake of becoming healthy. If I am morbidly obese and say I'm going to start cutting food, that's not to say I'm going to cutting food just to cut food. I'm not making cuts just to cut. No, I'm trying to make cuts to become healthy. It's not just cut because that's what we just want to do. No, let's. Well,
I can't argue against that because that's a generality. Of course, we want efficiency. So
it's just you don't get efficiency from big government.
But big government can also change direction. It may also be the tool.
Yes, remember, it can change direction.
Sometimes you need a big tool for a big problem.
And you can change direction by making it smaller. That's the direction you need to go.
I think to make it better is to use the tool in the correct way. I don't think you always need a smaller tool. I think it's all about using the right size tool for the right size problem. And I will agree with you that in many respects our government is too large. We're using one of these big giant wrenches to fix a little teeny tiny nut or what have you when we need a little wrench for that. But sometimes we have big nuts like this and we need a really big wrench like this. Yeah, I know.
You walked right into problems. That one.
So what I'm saying is we do need a government that can be flexible, that can be large when needed. For example, if World War II were to happen again, we would probably need a pretty big government to handle that. On the other hand, there are problems that are very tiny, and we don't need big government to address those issues. We can let those issues devolve
but
to a
that certainly doesn't stop them from sticking their nose in it.
Well, it doesn't. So, again, I will certainly confess that I think the government in the status quo has become much too large, much too big for its own britches. It's become inefficient and bureaucratic, and it's going to collapse inward on itself.
And like any progressive,
but it will
like any progressive, your answer is more of what caused that.
No, I think the answer is to reform what we have in the status quo, but not necessarily cuts for the sake of cuts, as Josh Gunderson points out, but rather strategic cuts while also increasing the size of government in certain areas. So I think, for example, an increase to might
ruin those areas for the future.
No. For example, mandating a living wage, mandating time off for parents to be involved in kids' education. Again, I think that right there would be an enlargement of government in your view. Nonetheless, I think it would be a wonderful solution that would immediately improve educational outcomes. So there are some things we could do. You
make the assumption that parents getting time off, they'll spend it with their children at school.
I think most children or most parents would, if given the option. Absolutely.
Yeah. Check all the parents who don't work at all. And
it's a generalization. It's a generalization, but I think most parents would rather spend time and be involved in their kids' education than
because that's what happens in the inner city for people who don't work and get funded. They spend their time at the schools.
I think a lot of people in the inner city do work and would be happy to be part of their kids' education if because
we see evidence of that. We see evidence of people who, when they're not working, they go to their kids' schools.
I guess I could sit here and Google search it, but do you really want to take the time to do that right now?
No, I want you to think common sense wise and look. Is that what's happening? Is that what's happening?
The only generalization I'm going to make is that parents who live in the inner city love their children as much as you and I love our children, and if given the opportunity, will certainly go and be in that kid's school.
I don't know that those necessarily can be. I don't know that those two necessarily equate to each other.
What do you mean?
I'm not going to sit here and doubt that they don't love their children.
Okay.
But I am saying that there are lots of people not in work who are also not in their children's schools.
That's why we need universal health care, so we get to the bottom of what's keeping them stuck on the couch, because that's not a normal or healthy condition.
Because all humans are normal and healthy.
So there you go. Another example of government solving a big problem.
Yeah, big government. Big government having all of these inefficiencies, and the answer to every liberal and progressive is more big government, no matter how bad it already is.
Hey, universal health care, I think it's fantastic, and if it improves outcomes for people.
Because he wants to do to health care what they've done to the public school system.
Well, that's why every country in the world has socialized health care, and none of them are trying to repeal it, right? There you go.
Yeah.
So, all right, we've devolved into soundbite, Scott.
Very rarely do we try to do that, but that was a lot of fun. Yeah, bad parents are a thing too. Yes, they are, Josh Gunderson.
Yes, they are.
Yep. But hey, this has been A Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall, pastor and atheist, getting together every week, 5 o'clock on kerncast.com, every Sunday at 5. Follow us on A Valid Answer at Facebook, and Kerncast on Facebook. And want to close out?
I just want to say that we are going to continue to disagree on this issue, but there was some overlap here, so there's certainly some room to say that big government does get big, it does become inefficient and bloated, it does collapse inward on itself, but then it reforms, and that the alternative to government could be no government, but it doesn't mean no power.
Gotcha.
So that's my closing thought there.
Last closing thought, answering Josh's question they just put on here. Do you spend any more time at the kids' schools because it's private? Yes, because I've made a personal investment into it.
Yeah, it costs you money.
Costs me money, so I spend more time. When it's free, you take it for granted. So that's, again, comes down to individuals feeling personal responsibility. That's
right.
That's my final
me
word,
there, Scott. But yes, generally, if you pay more for it, like if you have money in the stock market, you're going to check the stocks all the time.
And yes, Josh, everybody go to church. Until next time, this has been A Valid Answer. Thank you for joining us. See you guys.